All right, gang. Howdy. Um, it is Wednesday, and this is our final lecture video. And this is one of those examples of a lecture that I haven't given before, but now that we have this asynchronous learning, there's a space for it. And I'm actually happy there is, and I'm sure I'm going to make space for this in my future classes, regardless of whether we're online or not. And it's a lecture on tech. And the reason I haven't done it in my class before is there's no way to like recreate tech within the class, so I'm not gonna, and that's why I haven't had it before. And I realized that that's silly. It's still important information. So what I did is I tried to put together my thoughts on tech because tech is not something that I ever learned in class. It's not something that I learned in grad school. It's only something that I've learned by doing, and frankly by like failing. And making plenty of mistakes. So hopefully this is an overview. I just tried to put everything I had in me into it. And as always, let me know questions and concerns. So there are different kinds of techs. And frankly, I've only just recently experienced all of them. So there is a paper tech. A paper tech is a tech. Generally, it's only lights and sound and the stage manager because it's a tech outside of the theater. And you're basically going through cues to make sure that you're on the same page. It was what we did a lot in the storefront theater scene in Chicago because my company was itinerant for the first 7 years of its existence, which meant that we were always we would rehearse somewhere else, a cheaper place, and then we would load into the theater on a Saturday morning and start tech immediately. We were tech Saturday, Sunday. As things kept getting built, we would keep rehearsing, and then we would open the following, usually Thursday, Friday, Saturday, one of those days, depending on how much time we needed. So it was important sometimes, especially in a show that had a lot of cues, to meet up before we loaded into the space, before we were paying for the space, and go over everything. Just so we were on the same page, we could sort of start developing a language, or at least know where everybody else is coming from. Costume designers and set, we're just going over cues, so there wasn't much point. So that's paper tech, and I would say if you're in a situation where you're going to be loading in and starting tech immediately, or if you're in a situation where you can't have a dry tech, and you have a lot of cues, it's probably worth doing. I cannot foresee a situation where you would want to do a paper tech and a dry tech leading into a wet tech. That seems redundant. So a dry tech is, and this is something that I never experienced until I came to UNC Asheville. But a dry tech it's all the designers, and it's a night without the actors in the theater where you get a chance to see all of the first choices, essentially, right? And keeping that in mind is very important, that these are going to be first choices. They're not going to be perfect yet. That's what all of tech is for. So it's a chance to see the first choices, and it's a chance to get on the same page with your designers and to start to develop a language, start to develop how you're going to talk about cues within the scope of tech, because it's the hardest thing about tech is, yes, you've been meeting your designers once a week leading up to this, but especially versus your actors and stage manager who's always in the room, you have very little shared language yet. And so you are starting all of this from scratch in a very small amount of time for a very big job. So dry tech or paper tech is very helpful for that. I still consider both of those things to be a little bit of a luxury. I did paper tech more in grad school, and then for storefront, and then, like I say, dry tech here at UNCA. Yeah, I if you can do them, do them. If you can't, you're not the only one. Dry tech is also, or paper tech is also a good time to talk about how you're going to see the play moving, how you're going to see transitions moving, how you're going to layer those transitions. It's a really nice time because you don't have everybody on stage to at least go. So I think for most of these transitions, we're really going to see the actor first, and then we're going to see the location and the words, or whatever the layering is. It's a nice time to go ahead and set that language up so that your lighting designer and your stage manager and your sound designer most likely have that information going into wet tech. There are two kinds of wet techs, and this is one of those, like, I feel very passionate about this. It's an opinion, but I feel very passionate about it being right. There's a Q to Q, and there's a work through. So the Q to Q is just what it sounds like. You jump from Q to Q within the script, lights and sound generally, maybe entrances and exits, but those are almost always go along with lights and sound. So that you get the cue, you run it once. If it's perfect, great. Otherwise, you run it a few times, feel good. Then you move to the next cue. And that can mean you skip 10 pages. That can mean you skip 20 pages. That can mean you skip a half a page, just depending on the script and your needs and desires. That's a cue to cue. A work through is just how it sounds. A work through is you start at the top, you start going through the play, the actors, everybody's doing their thing. You get to the first cue, you hit it. If they're mostly, you need to go hold so that you can go back and adjust, tweak, hit it again, what have you, make sure the stage manager is comfortable with the timing, the actors are all on the same page. Once you get that and you got it good enough, not perfect, but good enough, then you keep moving, but you keep moving through the course of the play so that you really are running the entire play, and it's kind of a stop and go so that you're stopping and fixing and stopping and fixing, and you get the whole journey. If it's not obvious yet, I prefer the work through, and I strongly suggest the work through. The only time that I can think that you shouldn't do a work through is if you have an insane amount of cues and you only have so much time. In Storefront Theater, we did a lot of cue to cues. In fact, that was kind of my standard going into grad school. We're talking about a non-equity, off-loop, renting the space, very expensive once you get in tech. You only have so much time, so we felt compelled to just do it as quickly as we could and then try to string it all together. Then once I got to graduate school and I started being in rooms as an assistant director, equity theaters, and the way that we ran our tech, it was always a work through. And it kind of blew my mind because it was like, of course, if you have the time and the ability to do it, because what it does is, as a director first, it gives you context for the cues. So we may, like, it's a cue to cue, and you see one light cue, you're like, this is the light cue for the next 10 pages. You're like, oh, yeah, I mean, sure, I guess so. But then when you get into a full run and you see that light cue over the next 10 pages, you could very easily go, oh, no. Like, it's good for a page or two, but then you need something else, or then it doesn't work anymore. So you need to go back and fix it, and then that takes a lot of time, because what you're doing now is you're fixing things outside of the run. So you're running the whole thing as long as there's not a train wreck. So then at the end or at the beginning before the next run, you got to try to fix this light cue that you really could have fixed at the very beginning if you had just done a work through. So it gives you context for your cues. As a director, that's super important for me in making a decision, because I'm not really a tech-savvy guy. I have more, personally, lighting design, I usually picture things in my head that can't happen in reality. Costume design, I know when something's gorgeous, I know when something's definitely not right, but everything in between, I have no idea. Sound design, I'm better at, but as Michaela can attest to, I'm sometimes just like, I need a bleh here, or a zzz. I can't be all that specific. All that is to say, I need to see the full context to know whether the tech is working with the storytelling, because I'm just not proficient in tech. Otherwise, I'd be a technical artist, not a director. I'm proficient in storytelling, And so I need to see the whole story so that I can see the elements of the tech and whether they're supporting that story, helping that story, telling that story, or whether they're not. So as a director, that's insanely important to me. That's why I'm very passionate about this work through. At the same time, as a stage manager, I would think, and you all stage managers can tell me, it's insanely important to get your timing down and doing a work through and knowing what that timing is and the spacing between cues would be very important going into a first dress run. And then the actors finally get to continue to take that journey. Even though it's cut up and it's sporadic and it's jumbled, you don't go a whole day or 2 days, depending on how long your tech is, without experiencing that story. Because you've done all this rehearsal. You've come, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks through this thing. And finally, in the last, hopefully, week and a half or so, you're starting to run consistently and you're getting into this groove of runs, and then all of a sudden you don't run or experience the journey for a day, 2 days, when all this other stuff is coming at you. As an actor, I would appreciate the work through. So it's designers. There are certain designers that tend to really favor cue to cues. And I just don't agree with them. But I do come up against that. And I just have to, stand strong and be like, listen, we can get it done in this amount of time, but it needs to be a work through. And then I tell them everything that I just told you. Again, it's transparency. It's not like I just demand a work through. Like, I'd be like, I can't see your cues within the storytelling unless I see the whole storytelling. I don't know. When I say it, it seems obvious to me, but sometimes you have to kind of can say it a few times. Yeah. So finally, just to sum it all up, I don't believe, even though you think the cue to cue is the most efficient way to do it, I don't believe that's true. I believe the work through is the most efficient way to do it when you're talking about the long game. Cue to cue short game, sure, that's the most efficient. That's why we did it in storefront theaters. But in the long run, once you're getting in, if you can get everything pretty damn right that first day so that it's only tweaks thereafter, then you're in great shape to really run smoothly and to have a rest of the process be smooth. And you get a chance to be very specific with your tweaks as you move forward, as opposed to needing to fix chunks, which very often happens and very often happened when I did cue to cues. Okay. The room. Tech, at least in my world, has a notorious reputation that what happens in tech stays in tech. That's the way it always was for our storefront theater. Now, I mean, part of that was because we were stressed out, we were under the gun, we were working round the clock because we only had so much time in a space. Most of us were doing mini jobs. I was always helping to build the set while I was also acting in the show. And so you would get prickly and tired and exhausted, and we did cue to cues, so there was a lot more problems. So I don't know if that's true in your world or not, but I believe usually tech has this reputation of like, here we go, hold your breath, let's all come out with friends on the other end. I've come to believe that that's just bullshit. It just doesn't need to be that way. It is certainly a more fraught scenario. It is certainly a higher stakes scenario. But that doesnthat mean it has to be that way. So I actually challenge you to make sure that, like, come out on the other end having designers going, that tech went really smoothly. That was really fun. I challenge you to do that. Because understand that it's a new dynamic in the room. You've been in this room for 6 weeks with these actors, right? But now you're bringing in new artists who, yes, you've seen once a week, but the actors haven't seen either. You're bringing a new artist into a room, and anytime that happens, the dynamics are going to shift. And so you have to go back to all the same rules that I talked about during the rehearsal room conversation, and apply them to the tech room, because now you've got a new room. And at UNCA, you've got a crew, which is a luxury. But so you've got crew coming in, you've got designers coming in. It's going to be a new room. And you should prepare your actors for that as well, because they're not always thinking about this stuff. you should tell them, like, it's going to be a new room. Very excited about it. We got a lot of cool things to show you. Also tell them that you're not going to pay any attention to them, most likely, most of the time, because it's not about them for the next couple of days. It's about creating the world around them. That was always important to me as an actor, because I was always the actor who craved notes and who desperately needed that conversation with the director. And when I had a director be like, "Hey, love you guys, taking 2 days off from you guys. I've got to concentrate on this tech." That kind of gave me freedom as an actor, A, to not worry about not getting notes, and B, to kind of play within the tech with what I had. So if I knew I was going to repeat a thing over and over and over again because they were getting a cue, I just start tweaking it, playing with it, trying something. I actually always really loved tech for that reason as an actor. So the same rules apply. Make sure that the room is conducive for collaboration. So curate the collaboration. My biggest lesson of this came when I was doing Dream Play my second year in grad school. Strindberg play, but it was a Carol Churchill adaptation that I continued to F with. And we did a paper tech because I was asking for a ton of sound cues and a ton of light. And we got into tech, and within the first 15 minutes, it just all went to hell. Like, I had no idea. Like, I was lost. I was like, oh God, it's all going to be terrible, because my sound designer didn't feel confident that he knew what I was asking. My lighting designer, same deal. So we took a break, and a mentor came over to me, and he said, your lighting designer and your sound designer are far apart. And they were, just physically. Like, one booth was over there, and one booth was on the opposite side. And so we took the time, which was probably like 15, 20 minutes, in a tech that I knew was going to be tight to begin with. This thing took 2 10-hour days to tech. But we took the time to move the booths closer together so the sound designer could talk to the light designer, because so many cues were tied together. And that was an enormous help. And it actually went pretty damn smoothly after that. Even though we got it done, we had 2 days to do it. We never got that dress run we wanted to that second day, but it worked. So just curate the room for collaboration. Make sure that your artists are in the same general area. Make sure that there's a facility of communication. Enter with a positive attitude. Enter in tech with, like, we're here, tech, yes, because it's so easy to enter in tech just like barely breathing, because it is a little frightening because of all the reasons I just stated. It's very easy for tech to become disparate and for people to fall through the cracks or not feel like they're being listened to because they're not. And it is your job and your stage manager's job to hold that all together and to make sure that people feel like they're being welcomed into the space. This is something that I continue to work at. Again, I say all these things of, like, I hope to do all these things. I don't always do all these things, but I continue to hope to. And this is a time for some deep, full body listening. And as an example, it was a lighting cue. It was the fireplace during when Hedda was throwing the paper into the fireplace. And we went through many iterations of how that thing would grow and what the fireplace looked like to begin with. Because the fireplace wasn't right until the end. It got right. I was really happy with it at the end. But Danielle had to try a whole bunch of different things. And I could have, and my older self would have been like, we really got to fix this thing. It doesn't look like a fire. But instead, I could see her working. Like, I could see her working. I could see her distaste for what was happening, and I could see her trying to figure out how to fix it. And it was really, I mean, I could tell it in her body. I could tell it how she was watching it. And so instead of going over and being like, this is wrong, I just went over and be like, I can tell you don't like it. What do you think? And then she ended up solving it, and it ended up beautiful. But it was just a little example of how I recognized old self would have effed that up. New self was just like, what do you think? And that's you should rely on your designer's expertise. As I said before, my eye for design. I know when it's wrong. I know when it's right, and I don't know a lot in between. So I'm always, especially if I have a seasoned designer, like in this case Danielle, I always defer to them first, um, because knowing that like this was their first choice, this was their second choice, and they've got plenty of time to get to whatever choice they feel is right, and then we can talk. But I want to make sure they're having their process and that you're respecting their process, before you kind of barge in and collaborate where you know a lot less about what you're talking about. Um, 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 Oh, right. And then following that, just the understanding that you've been working on with your tools for weeks and weeks and weeks, and they finally are just getting into the room to work with their tools. They've talked about it, they've thought about it, they've brainstormed about it, but a lighting designer can't make a first choice until you've got those lights hung and you've got the actors on the set, and it's time, right? So their time period is so compressed. Um, I remember watching. His name is TJ. I'm going to forget his last name, but he works with Mary Zimmerman all the time. And I believe he's from Looking Glass, Chicago originally. But I was watching him design Guys and Dolls at Oregon Shakespeare. And I mean, the first day of tech, I'm like, yeah, everything's lit. That's cool. I had heard things about how amazing he was. And man, day after day, there'd be another layer. It was like a painter. It was truly like a painter. He would just paste the base coat. And the next day, put another layer on it. And the next day, put another layer on it. To the point where, like, the third day, I'm like, that thing is lit. That is gorgeous. And the next day, he put another layer on it. And by the end of it, it was truly magical. I don't know how he did it, other than I saw him do it day by day by day. And it was a real reminder to me that, like, trust other people's process, because everybody has one. Good artists have a process, and you should trust it and respect it. All of that being said, know what your time constraints are. Know what your big moments are. Know that you need to solve we've talked about this in the rehearsal process, but that's even more important in tech. Beyond those moments, don't be like, well, hopefully in another few days, which is like first preview, we'll have it figured out. So there is still this little timer inside you, and this comes from the curator part of your job, that has an eye on certain things that need to keep progressing. And I think that's the difference. If they stop progressing, then you need to step in and say, okay, where are we at? If they keep progressing, then you should be okay. But always kind of keep that internal clock, and specifically on those big moments. Okay, be the decider. As a director, and we'll get into the first day of tech here, I just feel like a pinball that's bouncing around the room answering questions. And that's okay. That's how you should feel. And I kind of get myself prepared for that. And it's trusting your knowledge of the play at this point. You are still the primary storyteller at this point, and you have the most knowledge at this point of the whole story. Return to your point of view, the heat, right, as your talisman to put you in the right direction. Every question that comes at you, always run that through your point of view. Every single question. Can I run this through my point of view? And then, like I say, respect your designer's expertise in that. But your job is just to answer questions. You're just going to get thrown around the room. Like the rehearsal room, it's always way better to look at it than to talk it to death. And be violent in your choices. This is the time to be violent. Like, to be really violent in the way that Bogart talks about it. Because like I said, you're the primary storyteller. You know this better than anybody. And it's time to be violent and make these choices. So, first day of tech. Emphasize that it is your stage manager's show to run. This is like from here on. I mean, it's always kind of the stage manager's show to run, but from here on out, they're on the mic, right? They're the ones everybody needs to listen to. So you do need to. You're starting your slow descent down these stairs of importance. and you got to take a step down so the stage manager can be at the top, and that's important. And I know probably both Michaela and Bree are freaking out a little bit because they remember when I told them this, but this is your show. I'm here for you. Let me know what you need. It's important to tell your stage manager that. Like I said, you're going to be the decider. You're going to answer lots of questions. Know that going in. Be ready to answer those questions. I get kind of excited about it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to walk through that door. People are just going to start coming at me with questions. It's actually pretty fun, I think, for me. I think you can kind of frame it that way. Curate the room, curate the collaboration, deep listening, and the biggest thing on that first day, one of the biggest thing on that first day, one of the four biggest thing on that first day is to be efficient. And this is one of the hardest things about tech for me. And that is, you get to a queue, and knowing whether you're good enough to move on, because that's important. Like, if you're good enough, if that queue can be finessed with just more reps at it, which you're going to get over the course of this week, it's also knowing your stage manager, trying to listen to your stage managers as hard as you can and as deeply as you can. If you think you can move on, you move on, because it's just important, right? That being said, don't move on until you get it right. And knowing the difference between that's enough to keep massaging, or that's enough to keep looking at it. Sometimes I'm like, I don't think that's exactly it, but I'm just going to need to see it more times. And we don't have the time to do that right now, so I'm just going to. And that's for something that's more of a tweak, more of a little thing. Or that's something where you're trusting your designer. Say your lighting designer's like, I got to rewrite that and play with it, but we don't have the time now. I can do that tomorrow during notes, right? Or the flip side, like, it's just not right. We've got to get this right. And usually that's like a timing thing. Usually that's like when you're trying to get your actor to be in sync with your stage manager, to be in sync with your lights, to be in sync with your sound. And you've just got to get the reps, and now's the time to do that. So being efficient with your time, knowing when you can move on and knowing when you can stay. All I can say is listen as hard as you can to your designers, your stage managers, and your actors, and make the best decision you can in the moment. Knowing that as long as you're asking yourself the question, is this a finesse thing we can move on with, or is this a big thing that we need to fix? You'll get it right most of the time. Have a sense of the moments that are going to take longer. Certainly, going into Hedda, we all knew that the breakout moments were going to take longer than anything else. So prepare for that mentally. And always know, no matter what, whether you've got 20 cues in the first 3 pages or 2, the first few pages will take a disproportional amount of time than everything else. They always do. You're always like, oh my God, it's been an hour and we're on 5. That happens every time. Because what you're doing is you're learning everybody's language. You're getting the actors to learn how to listen to holds and things like that. The stage manager is learning their space. The designers are learning your language. You're learning their language. All of this takes up a lot of time at the beginning. But if you don't freak out and you take that time, you're laying a foundation to work really well moving forward. So just know it's going to take a bunch of time. Great. Okay. First stress. So you have teched the show, whether you did the Q to Q or you did the work through. You've gotten through the entire show. Generally, that'll take a day. I mean, we always did a 10 out of 12, which was 10 hours out of 12 hours. They're shorter here, which is great. There are some times where I needed 2 10 out of 12s in order to tech everything. So it just depends on the play, depends on how much time you've had in the space, how familiar you are with the space, how familiar your designers are with the space, how familiar everybody is with each other, all that stuff. But once you've done that, then you get to the first dress. This is very hard for me. Pay attention to tech. This is not the time to fix your actors or to fix that scene that's been bugging you or that little thing that's just. Now, that's not to say that there might be some aha moments. And if you can find a space, if your lighting designer is because like we talked about before, how do you get out of your own way? Usually you do something else and the solutions to those things that you were focusing on before start to present themselves. So there's a lot of time during tech where I am paying attention to the tech, but then I see something that an actor goes, I'm like, oh, interesting. And I write it down in my little pad. And then I continue to pay attention to tech. And then as soon as a lighting designer is like, can I get 5 minutes to fix a cue? You're like, sure. I look at my pad and go, ooh. And then I run down to my actors and I tell them the little things. But I'm never taking time out of tech. I'm never telling my technical artists to hold, very rarely, in order for me to give acting notes. There's exceptions to these rules. But I wait if one of my technical artists needs some time, then it's an opportunity for me to jump down. All of that is framed by the idea of pay attention to the tech. And I really have to remind myself, because I will get engrossed with the story and go, no, how do the lights look? And again, I'm not good at this stuff, so it really takes me a long time to pick things out that I might finally pay attention to after the next 5 runs. But this is the rehearsal to completely pay attention to tech. It's so important on this first time through. You continue to pay attention to tech, but you start easing off tech and bring the actors back into your mind. So pay attention to tech. Asking questions and giving notes. So for me, again, I know myself when it comes to technical elements. So I tend to ask, especially this early in the tech process, the first really run of the show, I'm asking more questions than I am giving notes. Where are we at on so-and-so's dress? Tell me about what you're thinking on the fire. Or to the stage manager, I'm like, I've got these things. I'm almost positive you know all of it, because they're getting used to it too. So I really try to frame them as questions or as disclaimed notes. Like, it's my job to give you all these things, but I'm pretty sure you know most of them, if not all of them. This early in the process, because chances are a designer is going to be like, oh, yeah, that's what I'm working on. I mean, sometimes I'm so bad at costumes that I'll just come to the costume designer and go, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Where are you at? And then they can tell me where they are in their process, and then I have an opportunity to give some input. But without knowing where they are in their process, what their to-do list is, what they're focusing on, what their priority list is, like, I'd be just shooting in the dark, yeah? So err towards asking questions than giving notes at this point. Speaking of notes, production meetings. This is one of the things I hope I will see at UNCA moving forward. Ask me about this if this isn't clear, because I tried to tell Lisa about this, and I'm not entirely sure it was clear. In the quote-unquote real world, professional world, it's standard to have a production meeting at the end of every technical rehearsal. So that means starting on the first day of tech, first day of wet tech, at the end of that day, which is usually a long-ass day, and why in the professional world we all just get a 6-pack of beer for this to make it okay, but we all meet together. All designers, stage manager, director, not the actors. You give the actors notes separately. And this comes at the end of the actors' notes. So there's usually a little lag time. People have to wait around. So it sounds terrible so far, right? You're like, wait, I have to go through an entire day of tech and then have a meeting? Here's the thing. If you don't have a meeting, then this is what I'm doing as a director. I'm running around to every designer separately and having a conversation with them about questions and notes. My stage manager generally is doing something else at that time, so they can't be a part of that conversation. Then the next day becomes this kind of like, the sound designer needs time in a quiet room, but the lighting designer needs time without the sound and with a blank space. And the set designer needs time to paint on the space and everybody doesn't know what to do. If you have a production meeting, and hopefully this thing is only like 30, 45 minutes long, but a director gives notes to everybody in front of everybody because, of course, a lighting note is going to affect the stage manager, is going to affect the sound designer, may very well affect the costume designer and the set designer. So give notes to everybody so that there can be a conversation and a collaboration between everybody. Everybody's on the same page. And then the stage manager go, okay, what do we need for tomorrow? Who needs what? Sound designer, you need half an hour in a completely quiet theater. Great. Lighting designer, you need an hour to make notes on an empty stage. Great. Et cetera, et cetera. And so then you have a game plan to tackle the next day before all the actors come in and chaos ensues. Everybody's on the same page. Everybody gets the same notes. I didn't realize how important it was when I stopped having it. Again, this is not something I had in the storefront world, generally. I think it was a little more informal. But then once I started assistant directing in the professional world, I began to see this, and it was like, oh, of course, that's needed. And then coming here, with my own company, I do it. This is all very, very different because we have very few technical elements. But at UNCA, not having that has been like, it occurred to me halfway through the head of tech, like, oh my God, this would be so much better. So I encourage you, stage managers, to demand that at the end of every tech day. And that means all the way through day before opening. And hopefully that is a crazy quick one. A meeting after every day of tech. Okay. Rest of the way, or the subsequent dresses, you can start focusing on the actors again. Start having kind of both worlds in your brain. The whole storytelling starts coming together. And you're getting all the notes out of your system as you can. Especially like that first day after the dress, get it all out. Because what you're going to want to then do is you're going to really want to start making a conscious effort to dwindle the notes so that by the end you have very, very few, and they're minimal. I've seen, as an assistant director, actors continue to get overloaded with like 20, 30 notes each the night before opening. And all that tells your actors is, I don't trust you yet, right? So because of that, you need to start asking yourself, okay, I've been given this note kind of consistently to this actor. They're not quite doing what I have in my head. So is what they're doing still telling the story? And is what's in my head just specific to me and how I would do it? And I go through this during these runs. And a lot of times the answer is, what they're doing is fine. It's totally telling the story. Is there another way to tell that story that's in my brain that I've been trying to get them to do? Yeah, but let it go. So you're starting to let go of a lot of notes, which is kind of freeing as well. And you're starting to trust the actors, just they know the story and they're going to tell the story. That being said, make sure that you don't hit opening night wishing you would push someone just a little bit more. And again, this is one of those listening things, like, can the actor take it? And if you think your actor can take it and they continue to respond to your pushing, push them just a little bit more. I had one of my mentors I assistant directed for at the Goodman. She told an actor very late in the process, she said, listen, you're supposed to be Hamlet and you're playing Horatio. And I was like, ooh, that's a very intense note to get at this point. But she saw a moment where like it was make or break, and the play needed this actor to be Hamlet. And the actor just wasn't coming with the kind of stakes and the kind of ferocity that the role required. And so she laid it on the table for him, and he responded. And I've kept that note in my back pocket. I gave it once, not as a director, but as an assistant director to a director to give to his actor, and he loved it and did it. So it's a good note towards the end if you're not getting what you need. So don't lay off, but at the same time, really consciously go, can I let go of this note and still tell the story really well? And then this last thing, and if you've done your job, then at this point, you should start feeling less and less necessary in the room. And there always comes a time when it's sometime around final dress, getting towards opening night, where I'm like, I just don't need to be here. And that's great. It's a very disheartening and hollow and sad feeling as a director, but it's fantastic because that means you are becoming less necessary, which is great because your job's almost over. Okay, final preview, or final dress. Minimal notes. You're only looking for the notes that you absolutely have to give. If that's pushing a little bit more, hopefully not. Just push a little bit more. Mainly it's technical stuff like sight lines, opening up the blocking a little bit, timing issues, technical issues, just tiny, tiny little things that aren't performance driven. When I say that, I mean, it's not like you're changing the performance of an actor. You're just technically changing, like opening them up a little bit, or making sure the timing on an entrance is right. Like, these are technical things. They're not going to send the actor into a huge, deep questioning of, did they build the character the right way from day one? You're simply saying, make sure the right side of the audience can see you in that moment. At the end, and this is personal but important to me, passing the torch. I believe this is a sacred moment as a director in which you give the show over. And the actors are riding the bus and the stage manager is driving that bus, and it is theirs. And I make it a point to make a moment out of this transfer. It is a sacred transfer. It is one you always hope you do with a clear conscience and knowing that you did everything that you can. But it is necessary to say, this is your show now. I trust you implicitly. You know the show better than I do now. I'm not worried about it. I look forward to watching it. They need that ownership to take it where it needs to go. This next thing is, again, a personal thing. It's a personal opinion, but it's one in which I feel very strongly about. I know there are exceptions to this rule, depending on what kind of theater, how long a run is. But I feel very, very strongly that you should not, as a director, give notes after opening night or any subsequent night. I know directors who I respect and admire who have and who do. It is their show. If you have to give notes after opening night, I do not believe you did your job well enough. The only exception to that is if a stage manager comes to you and is like, so-and-so's doing this thing that I'm pretty sure is not telling the story. And you can give this, and this has happened to me before, I can give the stage manager, you know what, you can give that note. This is your show now, so you give that note. And I appreciate the dialogue and the collaboration, very much so, but it's got to come from you. So, again, that's a big fat opinion, but one in which I feel strongly about, and there are exceptions too. And finally, walk out and let go. That's the best thing you can do, and it's actually quite freeing. If you've done your job, you know you did everything you could. It's not perfect. Art never is. You're always, if you get a chance to go back and see the show, you're going to see moments that you didn't figure out. I'll say in Hedda, the moment where Hedda goes up behind Taya and says, I'm going to light your hair on fire, that thing, and then it transitions into the breakout of Lovebore coming up and singing the Beatles song and all that. I loved everything that happened. The transition from the reality to the dream, I never got. I just didn't get it. I tried it like 5 different ways and I ran out of time. And I didn't say publicly I didn't get it because everybody needed to feel comfortable about it, but I just didn't get it. It was clunky and that drove me crazy. But there are going to be those things because we're not perfect. And this is such a beautiful live art that it just is the way it is. I mean, I believe that if you actually done your job right, you should see as a director new things they're coming up with every night. Because if they're living and breathing in that thing like you've allowed them to do and you've given them ownership to do, then sorry, I just got a text message. Then you should see new things happen. Whereas that birthday party that I talked about, the experience where I was just very precise and did all that stuff, I would sit in the audience and I would be so tense, and I would kind of in my brain and sometimes in my body be acting out every part just as I had crafted it and choreographed it. And if there was a hiccup anywhere, it would devastate me. And that's just a terrible way to be. It's also the antithesis of what it should be. So, and I would also say, don't go to every performance. I know directors that would go to every performance of every show that they've ever directed. And I just think it's not healthy for you. It's not healthy for your actors. They need to be able to perform without the director in their room. They've done it for so long. Just give them a break, and give yourself a break. How many times can you see a run of the same show? I love, obviously, being in there at opening, although I know plenty of directors who would take opening off and go to a bar because they just couldn't deal being in the same room with critics, which is fair. I support that too. But I'm there at opening. And I'm there at closing. And if it's a long run, then I'll be there at some point in the middle. But I like to be able to let go. Now, all that said, with my own company, my job doesn't end when the show opens. My job as a director ends when the show opens. My job as a stage builder and as a curator of audience and as a representative of my theater company doesn't end. So I'm at every show with those. But if I'm for hire, then I don't. I like to let it go. It's kind of wonderful. Okay, that's way longer than I thought I would talk about tech, but I think all that was pretty important. As always, before Monday, let me know before class on Monday. 1 to 3 thoughts, 1 to 3 questions, both, please. I really, really appreciate the feedback on these because this is new for me as well. So any kind of clarifications really help me. Any kind of I really like this part of it really, really helped me, especially with ones that I haven't done before. So read the final chapter for Bogart. We'll be discussing that. I will be getting in all of your first day addresses and hopefully getting responses back to you rather immediately. If you get it in within the class period, I get it right back. If you don't, it's harder for me to get it right back because I'm outside of the class and I'm back into homeschooling and daycare and that. And really start thinking about this toy theater, because the sooner you start thinking about it, the sooner you can come up with those first choices and the sooner that you can start building on that. Yeah. And the sooner you can ask me questions about it too. It's a very different format. It should be fun. It should really be like a sandbox. It should be a sandbox because all the work should be almost behind you. You should have a fable that works for you. You should have first thoughts that have led into a first day address, that have led into a hot point of view. You should know the story really, really well by now. So now you get to create it in this little world of toy theater. So that part, once you get through the rough stuff, should be really, really fun. And I hope it is. All right. Be safe, be sane, be healthy, and I'll see y'all